This is an exhibition where all the posters are shown together, and it's the first time that they're all together, and in a way it can be considered like a kind of retrospective of this project that you are working on. When did it start, actually?
Yeah, with posters I started working in 2000 or 99, of the first posters. Actually 99, but where they really started with putting them all in the streets and in public space and stuff was in 2000. So the posters are kind of one side of works that I do, and yeah.
And they are always contextualized in the city or really the neighborhoods where you're working, so always a specific location.
Yeah, they're always, I mean, it's a little bit different. They're always made to be put in public space, and a huge point of the posters is that they have these questions about the use of space somehow, and the definition of space, very basic questions, and that they really change with the location somehow. And some of them are made very specifically for a specific area, like the one I made for this show is made for San Lorenzo and should be shown in San Lorenzo and hung in the streets of San Lorenzo. But there's some others that are more general and have been put in very, very different locations, which is another interest because then it also becomes clear how much they change with the context and the location where they're put.
And there is always a relation with the space, but in a way you bring also these elements of the urbanistic context inside an exhibition space. In a way you translate elements of the public everyday life in an artwork, and then you put together theory and pop culture, and you make a collage.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a really important point in all my work, and as I said, posters are one point, and I really like to work all the time in different contexts, because for me it's really important point that to look at space in a general sense and how space is defined, it's not enough to look at just the physical space as a static thing somehow, but that you always have to look at space as a process and a set of interrelations, being it social or economic or political interrelations, and therefore also, like, of course, the daily life of the people living there. And therefore it's important for me always to mix like ideas of architecture and art, perhaps with whatever, like football or pop music, and then again with politics and comics or all different kind of things, and put them together to make this kind of more heterogeneous idea of space, and space is something not close but always changing also. And that's important for me, and therefore it's also important for me to have works in different locations, and quite often I have the posters in the street and at the same time in an exhibition, and again that also underlines the importance of context, because of course you look at it quite differently if it's in a kind of relatively white cube situation as opposed to outside in the street. I like that.
And you made this project of the poster in many different places around the world, and trying to analyzing often the same questions and the same items of these places is, of course, is an element of globalization, but actually your interest is focusing now in particular about this idea of modernism, about this idea of the 60s, 70s housing blocks that are a little bit a common situation for many other cities. And what is actually your opinion about modernism, this also rereading of modernism today?
That's a big question, but I guess for me it really started out as an interest because I was interested in ideas about trying to create like a perfect city or ideal city, and of course a lot of these 60s, 70s planning ideas sort of had that, and it's really important for me in the beginning of my interest. I would say later I also am much more concerned in general with like urban space somehow, so some of the posters are no longer referring specifically to modernism, but just to development in new city spaces somehow. But for me, the important thing about it with the works that are very directly related to the modernism is exactly this, that there you can so clearly see some kind of ideals and attempts to try and create an ideal town somehow. And I mean, it's become easy to criticize that later and to say that they all failed or something. And maybe that was also something for me, that I have this really mixed relationship. I also really have a love for these, both the ideas and for the areas themselves, and also to try and have a discussion about some of the positive sides about it, and also to get away from this stigmatization that have happened of these kind of 60s and 70s.
When you did a project here in San Lorenzo, which were the elements that were characterized by this place, by these neighborhoods?
Yeah, for me, what was interesting was, I think first of all, like actually, not against what I just said about always thinking beyond like the physical neighborhood, but the first thing was that it was so clear how San Lorenzo was framed in somehow, and I thought that as a starting point was interesting how between the, I guess, highway, university, and railway, that it's so clearly defined, and within that really has a grid somehow, and that was just a physical kind of starting point, but which I think I used also as a starting point for the poster somehow, and building that up to have this area that's closed in between these things. And particularly I also like that, found really interesting this clash between like maybe 70s planning and the old world, from like, I don't even know how old it is, but that you see these things really coming together, and those two completely different things suddenly end up framing a new area.
When you pick up some elements of the city, of the neighborhood, and you make collage, then you make always these questions, very actually often they are very basic questions. Is a kind of critique on the way how actually people sometimes are not really thinking about how space can be, or actually there is a kind of very, how do you say, very light way to think about important elements that actually are basic elements for a community.
I think it's really, I guess, that's another thing I like about putting the posters out. It's very, I find unpresumptuous. People can ignore them if they want, or they can look at them if they catch their attention somehow. And it's an important point that I'm not out there kind of, I mean, of course I have opinions about things, and that's why I put the posters out, because I think it is very important to discuss these questions about how space is defined and used. And for me, it's this open space that is constantly changing, and really also reflects economic and political power very strongly. And I think there's all these tiny things that's changing all the time. It's important to consider what they mean.
Normally people have the idea of urbanistic in a very static way, like something that has always been there and will always been there. There's no movement. And actually, what is interesting in your work that you show how actually everything is moved by people, or by the people who's living there, and everything can change. And also the idea to make a question is also a way to, with a question you can also react on and say something, your opinion, and the way you change. A very important element that is, if not the urbanistic thing, but is the point of view of a space.
I think for me one thing actually with the posters in general is that they are also really relating to the whole, a very classical idea about public space and the importance of having a public space where there's room for different opinions and people to meet. And posters are, I mean, black and white posters are really, really cheap and accessible way for a lot of people to communicate in public space, and interestingly, of course, becomes criminalized in most cities now, and only if you have the money to buy a big advertising space are you allowed to use public spaces. Actually, it's not about that you can't put things in public space, you can, but you have to pay for it, and you have to pay a lot. And I think to kind of try and insist on this and keep putting up posters is just also in itself a kind of trying to insist on an idea about public space that I think is very important. And exactly this, that, I mean, what I really like about urban areas is that it's a meeting place for a lot of different opinions. And I think for anything, no matter what, it's always important to have spaces where different opinions and people can meet. And if you get totally segregated cities where one group of people live here and never ever meet the people over here, and I don't think it's a very healthy way of living for anyone. And that's an ideal of urbanism that I kind of find very important. Then there's also the thing about what you just mentioned, I think relates back to what I forgot before, that, I mean, when urban areas change, it is often considered as just a kind of change of the city somehow, and not necessarily by any kind of economic, political interest.